And here I come along in my late 40s. I'm just learning to fly. I'm in partnership with my father-in-law, building a Pacer, a Piper Pacer, rebuilding a Piper Pacer. So I'm learning to fly. I'm learning to work on airplanes, kind of living a couple of dreams out. Our two daughters were either in college or on their way, so time was more available. A little extra financial needs were, though that was available, the financial stuff. And I show up for work one day, and I find out that as the district manager on my particular district, it was Rainier District, covered Mount Rainier, the expectation is that district managers will be engaged in wildfire. And there's lots of wildfire, Brian can attest to that, in Washington State. And I ended up starting at age 49 as a rookie firefighter, just right there with the 18-year-olds. So off I went. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute, the actual process. And in that process, I worked through all of those rookie jobs into lower level supervision jobs. And that was quicker for me because I was a supervisor in my day job. And so I ended up passing through a lot of steps a lot quicker than a 20-year-old would. And then I became a division supervisor, which is a ground-based position that covers a major sector of a fire. A large fire might have 6 divisions, but that would be a 150,000 acre fire. So a division could be anywhere from 1 mile to 10 miles of fire line. It's a lot of fire, and typically as many as 100, 150 staff on that. So I became a division supervisor, which is the prerequisite to become an air tactical group supervisor. You can't do the air job until you know the ground job is the thinking. And it makes sense to me. It did at the time. So, okay, is it going to work? It's not working, Tim. Now what?
You're.
Let's try that one. There we go. It'll be more fun with this one. So my story my personal story is kind of the basis for what I want to talk about, because I learned this stuff as an older guy, and it was fascinating to be a 49, 50, 52, 54-year-old guy in this game learning about wildfire suppression. No, I don't want that either.
Try the map. Oh, well.
There we go. So I'm going to talk about the incident command system, which is the structure that wildfires are managed under nationwide. It is a federal system that everybody except the one state that would not comply in the entire United States that has to do things different. California. And in fact, most firefighters that work under the ICS system really don't want to go to California. They use it, but they have their own hybrid, and it makes it very complicated. But I worked with folks from NC Forestry in Washington. I worked with Alaskans. I went to Alaska and worked with folks from the lower 48. Everybody works under the same system. Everybody has the same credentials, except for California. So the incident command system is pretty important. It's based on really on a military system, and I'll show you a little bit about it in a minute. That's the first thing I want to talk about. I'm not going to dwell on it, but I think it's worth understanding it. Second piece is I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the basics of wildfire behavior. There's some undergirding principles of fire behavior that affect the way aerial supervision and aerial attack, as well as ground-based supervision and ground-based attack are done. And believe it or not, they're the same principles, because fire behaves the same way. And understanding fire behavior is really important. Then I'm going to move to the topic you came to hear about. So I'm not going to dwell a lot on those first two, and that is wildfire aircraft. And I'm going to start my timer so my wife doesn't have to give me funny looks, and I'll be going, what? Except I got the wrong timer. Mary, would you set a timer for me? And she'll give me, no, it'll come in my hearing aids. 45 minutes, and that will make me, George said I had an hour. I don't think it's going to take that long, but I'm going to honor it. So I'm going to talk a fair amount about wildfire aircraft, and finally the job I had is called air attack, not air boss. Air boss is a different guy. Nobody actually uses that terminology, but it isn't uncommon, George. You weren't out of line. It's air tactical group supervisor or air attack, and I'm going to talk about that. Let's see. Yeah, it worked on time. So these two folks were hotshots. Anybody here hotshot crews? They're the high-end ground-based firefighters. They have a hotshot crew is 20 people, the most trained people in the system. And to be on a hotshot crew, you have to have a certain minimum amount of field experience. It's typically about 4 years. And then they run right up through the supervisory ranks, and that all the way up to a hotshot crew can have a division supervisor on it, or more than one. So hotshots know wildfire. They've been there, they've done it. They're aggressive. They're the people when a bunch of, they're called shots. So when the shot crew shows up, just get out of the way and point. And they just go. I mean, it's a riot to watch these folks go. I mean, they are just all energy. They're, you know, what's that, elbows and behinds kind of a thing, and that's what's going on, you know. So these two folks went to the same basic training the 49-year-old went to. It's called guard school. It's a 5-day school, and it's just basics of how to keep yourself safe, the basics of fire suppression, and how to live in a base camp, because you're living in a base camp with a bunch of people in tents. And so everybody goes to guard school. So here shows up this 49-year-old at guard school. That would be me. And I'm sitting in a room full of 18-year-olds or 19-year-olds. And the guy that stands up on the class on map and compass, it's a 1-hour class, is my day job partner. And he looks up at me, or he stands there and he looks at me and he goes, "Carlson, what the hell are you doing here?" I said, "I'm in guard school." He said, "Get out." Because I didn't understand map and compass, so I didn't have to have that 1-hour segment. Oh. So I got a 1-hour reprieve. That's the only thing I missed in guard school. And I just did all the stuff with all the rest of these 18-year-olds, and I kept looking at the old guy with the gray-white beard and laughed at him, and I had a lot of fun. So the end result is, latter part of guard school was understanding the incident command system. And I know you can't see the details, the nature of org charts being put on a wall, so I'm going to walk you through it a little bit. At the top of the pile is the incident commander, the IC. The IC and the base camp are the incident command post, the ICP. Kind of logical stuff. And that is where, if you ever see a wildfire base camp, that's the ICP. Working for the ICP that's a critical one, the public information officer. That's the face of the wildfire. That's the person you see on the nightly news, you know, the talking head talking to the media person is the public information officer. I never saw him. Well, I see him in the morning at the briefing, but that's it. That's command staff. The general staff is this 4 positions across here. I'll go through them briefly. Finance. A typical wildfire is spending $1 million, $2 million a day. I'm sure they were easily spending $1 million a day in Tim and Nancy's backyard. I mean, the meter just rolls at this tremendous rate. It's almost unbelievable. And airplanes, the more aircraft you put on it, the faster the meter rolls. It's big time money when those airplanes are flying. I looked at that as a brand new guy and said, I don't want anything to do with that. That is not me, right, Marion? I can't even balance a checkbook. I looked at logistics. Those are the folks that are moving all the materials, setting up the base camp, the food unit leader, what all else is up there? Comm unit. So everybody's putting the radio repeaters up on the ridge tops. I mean, there'd be 10 people in the comm unit, you know, radio technical specialists. There's a lot of people doing a lot of actually very interesting things. I thought, well, that might be all right, but that's not me. I looked at planning and said, cool, they create the shift plan for the day. A shift plan on a big fire is 35 pages. I mean, the page 2 is the objectives for the day, strategic and tactical. Page 3 and 4 are a few other things about safety, and then the remaining pages are lists of all the resources, the people, the bulldozers, the excavators, the aircraft, all are listed, they all have numbers. So if you're overhead, you have like IB 017 or something. That's Dennis Carlson, Air Tactical Group Supervisor, 017. So you know who you're working with, and it's pages and pages of that. And it's broken out by division. So if you're Division Delta, everybody in Division Delta is going to show up on that page. The reason is everybody carries a shift plan in their back pocket all folded up and looking like a, kindling. But when you're in a pinch and you need to know who you've got to call in the next division, you can pull that sheet out and say Division Echo Smith, and Division Echo Smith is going to come up on the radio. So the shift plan is important. All that stuff is done in planning. Interesting, way too much like my day job, not interested in that one. Then I'm sitting there at age 49 looking at this operations section chief. Operations, what's that? That's the people to put the fire out. That's this whole thing on a big fire, that's about 40 or 50 people, maybe 60 on a really large fire. That can be 600 people right there in that group. I mean, that's typical of the proportion of folks suppressing the fire versus all the supporting actions to get those people out there on the ground doing their job. So I looked at that and said, well, that's interesting stuff. What's a task force leader and a strike team leader, and what are single resources? Single resources are firefighters, or timber fallers, or a bulldozer with an operator, or an excavator with an operator. All those things are single resources. All of those pieces of equipment have a supervisor. So there's a dozer boss, a falling boss, and that means there's a person with a radio that's a firefighter, that's a qualified firefighter, supervising that crew of two that's dropping, falling, or burning trees. You have to take down burning snags inside of a fire, or they'll fall outside the fire line. Very dangerous job. You want somebody with a radio saying, can you take that 48-inch Shasta fir that's 250 feet tall? This was me doing this once. Can you take that down? And I'm not telling them to take it down because it's so stinking dangerous taking down a tree, and it's dead. So the top's all rotten, but you don't know how rotten it is. And of course, these guys are timber fallers, and they say, yeah, man, I can do that. I mean, there's a certain amount of this guy thing going on there. You understand that one? And these guys go up and they start cutting this 250 foot tall Shasta fir. And one guy has a rope around the guy with the chainsaw, and he's standing back looking up. Wow. And the guy with the chainsaw can't see up. So this guy's looking up, and when that tree starts to do anything the faller needs to know, he gets the rope treatment. And if you get the hard rope treatment, it means get your hind end out of there because it's coming down. This particular tree I'm talking about fell. It got to an angle of about like that. And just about where my wristwatch is, it broke. In the inertia, when a tree's going this way and the top breaks out, the tree goes exactly 180 degrees opposite. And of course, where does that put it? The tree's falling this way. It puts it right on top of the stump. So you better get your hind end out of there, and that's the nature of the job these guys do. It's tremendously dangerous. So those are all single resources. If they get grouped together, they become a strike team. That would be a mixture of a bulldozer and a couple of fallers and maybe an excavator. If they're all the same, they become a task force. So 5 brush engines, those small engines you see running around. Typically, they would be NC DNR. Around here, you see looks like an overgrown pickup with a water tank on it. That's a brush engine. A group of those would be a strike team. And then you work up and you become a division supervisor. So I worked through all of those various jobs, had a blast doing every last one of them. I was in hog heaven. So I spent 6 years doing that. That's the backside of a guy that do I look like that now? I don't think so anymore. But anyway, we're doing a burnout there, and I just had a blast doing that job. It was just more darn fun. Shouldn't get paid overtime for that kind of stuff, but I did. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, once I had become a division supervisor, that was the pathway that I could transfer over and start training to be an air tech. So you can't do it until you can't be an air tech without being a division supervisor, because they want that experience on the ground. And they knew I was aiming that way from the get-go. And I had a whole lot of people supporting me. I did it in about a 9-year run total till I was certified to go out on my own. And typically that would take more like 15. But I was older, I was a pilot, I could talk pilot to pilots, and I had done a lot of supervision. So I was able to actually move through it fairly quickly because I was an old guy. All right, we're going to switch to fire behavior. These are some real basics. Fire runs upslope and downhill. It's worth remembering. Fire runs upslope and downhill. Fire backs downslope and it backs against the wind. So it'll run one way and it'll creep or back the other way. It's just the nature of the wind and topographic relief. Go light a fire on a slope, it doesn't come down very fast, but it sure as heck goes up fast. And you can see that picture in the background. That's actually a burnout that I was flying over it and they commenced the burnout. Those 3 flame fronts are the heads of 3 points where they started. And it wasn't particularly steep, but you can see where, by the way the wind is blowing, the fire's running downwind and upslope. That is fundamental to know that. Rates of spread are influenced by relative humidity, strongly by relative humidity. RH controls massive amounts of most fires that become large are because relative humidity is low. And what it does is it affects the fine fuels, and the fine fuels being the grasses and the twigs that dry out very rapidly, and that's what carries a fire. The coarser fuels need to be dry to burn, but if you don't have fine fuel moisture, or if you're lacking fine fuel moisture, fires get very, very risky very, very rapidly. And I was on a fire one time, the relative humidity this was in western Washington, where the fuel beds, literally the leaf litter and duff, are deep because that's the rainforest side. When that stuff dries out, and we were at a relative humidity around 15%, the probability of ignition, it's a measurement they use for how many times an ember falling on a piece of grass, whatever, on your fuel bed will ignite. The probability of ignition that day was 100%. Every last ember that fell on the ground was going to light a fire. And we did a burnout because we had to. And actually my boss, the operations section chief, said, "Stand by, Carlson, I'm going to come over there too." That's pretty unusual. It was so spooky. So we got a guy with a drip torch and he went, dribble, dribble. It's like the leaves were gasoline. So relative humidity is a huge factor. Slope is a huge factor because the steeper the slope, the more rapid that fire will climb up it. Aspect is the same thing. South aspect dries out much more than north aspect, so that drives the fire. And lastly, wind. There is one other factor, that's topography. If you ever look at like a stream channel, take the stream channels that ended up dumping into Lake Lure, where you've got that incised channel. That is the highest risk place for a fire to run because they're called chimneys. And a fire that gets started in the bottom of a, quote, chimney will tend to run up that chimney. It gets contained and it's self-heating, self-drying, and it'll run up that chimney much quicker than it would run up a knobby, what would that be, a convex slope rather than the concave slope. And finally, most people, I don't know, you just don't, I never thought about it. The peak burning period is a real critical part of the day. It's a real heads up part of the day, around 2 to 4 o'clock. It's often after the peak heat point of the day, but is the minimum relative humidity point of the day. And that's when fires tend to make their biggest runs. So if you ever watch wildfire behavior, afternoons are when it's going to happen, and it's when relative humidity is low. Okay, so let's switch to helicopters and tankers. A couple of pictures. Both of those are vintage military aircraft. Anybody recognize them? Want to call them out?
P3?
Once again?
P3s and Huey.
Yeah, a P3 and a Huey. So that's a D model Huey. I actually worked with Washington DNR. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, but that's a rebuilt D model, completely rebuilt. Actually has a Cobra engine in it and Cobra transmission, so it's got a higher horsepower engine in it. And the P3 Orion is, they're actually out of service now. They were the mainstay of the tanker fleet for years. And they've been replaced largely by that crazy looking BAE 146. It's some European thing. And about 10 years ago, the federal government really decided they wanted to eliminate all the gasoline powered piston engines. They wanted to go to turbines. They just feel turbine dependability is higher. I have two stories that I'll digress for a moment and tell you about how they were lower. I was in a Bell Jet Ranger in Alaska, going out as an air attack, and we had a fuel control unit failed right in the middle of Fort Wainwright, and not a soul in sight. We were probably 40 miles south of Fairbanks. I looked at the pilot and I said, "Problem?" He says, "I lost power." And I said, "You got an LZ right there." He says, "I got it." And we auto-rotated into the LZ. Turned out it was a firing range on Fort Wainwright. It was really cool, all these pop-up targets. And I was kind of having fun once we got on the ground. And it was kind of a non-event because helicopters auto-rotate, and I had a personal experience with an auto-rotating helicopter because the turbine engine failed. But the Forest Service and the federal government think turbine engines are more dependable. The second event was I was flying as an air attack. I was in a Aero Commander, but it had Garrett jet engines in it. Are you familiar with Garrett's? Many of you, the screaming, loud, and one of the fuel control units on that Garrett went nuts. And it's overfueling and underfueling, and the engine's overspeeding and underspeeding. And of course, we were right on the ridge top of the Cascade Mountains in Oregon. And I looked at the pilot, and he says, "I got to feather it." And I said, "Okay." And we went in, unfortunately, that's twin engine aircraft. We went back into Albany or some airport back there and landed. Again, another non-event, but I'm not so convinced turbine engines are all that dependable, but that's what the Forest Service thinks. So that is the replacement for the P3. So the World War II aircraft are pretty much going out of favor. This one is a particular favorite of both Mary's and mine, isn't it? We had a very fun experience. This is the Fire Boss. That was actually, well, I can't say that. It was a gift to me by Bud Whipplinger. Anybody here Whipline air floats? Or Whipline, that was our Whipline floats. They're made in south of Minneapolis, St. Paul, right? And Bud Whipplinger called me one day. My last couple of years, I was not a forester. I was working as running the fire aviation program for the state of Washington. And I get this call from this guy named Bud Whipplinger. He tells me who he is. And he says, "I heard people say I can talk to you." I said, "Well, you're welcome to talk to me." He said, "I've been trying to work with the government." He says, "and I can't get anybody to listen to me." And he's mad. I said, "Well, I'm listening." And I said, "But remember, I'm not big G government. I'm little G government. I'm the state of Washington." And he talked to me and he said, "Well, I know you guys use a scooping aircraft, a water scooping aircraft. We had a contract for one very, very, very tired old PBY. Talk about World War II vintage. It was a PBY that this guy had basically taken a couple of exhaust pipes off of a diesel truck. I mean, that's a little bit of a stretch, but not much. And mounted these two scoops so they would drop out the belly of the aircraft. He'd land, power up, full throttle, drop the scoops, and put about 1,700 gallons of water in a big tank in the back of that PBY, and he'd come screaming over you and drop it. And very loosely run organization. He'd turn on the fire. He literally had a siren on the aircraft. And the first time I was out in the woods, and all of a sudden you hear this siren, and then the sun's going down. There's a fire engine siren, and kafooey, we get plastered with soapy water. It was very fun. But he was way outside of compliance with the way people want to do things today. I mean, he was so far out. And he was under contract with the state of Washington, who managed the contract. little old me. And I was the one that had to tell this old guy that we're done. Now we got a problem. We don't have an aircraft. We made good use of the Scooper aircraft. And Whipplinger calls up, knowing this problem is existing, and said, will you work with me? I said, well, I'll work with you, but I can't just write a contract. It's state regulations and all this stuff. And he says, well, the Bureau of Indian Affairs guys, they want to work with me. So I got a hold of the Bureau of Indian Affairs guy in Boise, which is fire headquarters for the entire nation. He and I became friends. I drove down to Boise, met with him. We made an agreement that he could write a contract. The government can write a contract on a blink of an eye, but they got to be able to fund it. Well, we had the funding. DNR did, Washington DNR. So we provided the funding. He provided the contract. And the first fire boss to get to the western states was because the two of us got together, and Bud Whipplinger called me up and said, I need a guy I can talk to. So Mary and I were traveling back in the Midwest, and I stopped, and we met Bud Whipplinger, and took us to his house, showed us his father's float plane, the very first one they ever flew with. I think it was an old T-Craft or something. And now there's 20 of those things flying in the western states. That's become the mainstay of the small fleet of single-engine air tankers. That one's on floats. I'm going to show you the other extreme is that guy. I actually worked one fire with, I think it actually was that aircraft. That is a DC-10, isn't it? Yeah. I think that's owned by Erickson. Man, when you call that guy in and he flies under you at 2,000 feet and you're going, because an air attack is the top of the pile flying. Well, we'll get to that later. And that airplane goes over your head or underneath you. It looks like you got a baseball field flying underneath you, and then he lets go with the retardant, and it goes, and it goes, and it goes, and it goes. And that was about a $50,000 drop right there.
Oh, wow.
And that was 10 years ago, so I can't imagine what it costs today. So many of the single-engine air tankers are on wheels, and they work out of tanker bases. They can load them with retardant, they can load them with pure water, they can load them with water with foam. And that picture down in the corner is a large air tanker dropping mud, which is retardant. Mixture of borate compounds with clay. I'm not a chemist. We got chemists around this outfit that could explain it. I'm not one. But it's sticky, and the purpose of retardant is exactly what it says. It retards fire spread. It does not put it out. It makes the surface of the woody material or the leaves retardant to fire spread. So if the retardant is adequately applied and there's no skips in it, which is a big deal to make sure every drop gets linked to the last, because if you leave a 10-foot skip, you've just wasted the whole works, because it'll go right through that skip. You have to link the drops. And the pilots all know that. These guys are phenomenal experts. So that is retardant going down. The old stuff stayed red for years. The new stuff is called fugitive, and it'll go away in a year. But if you were to go to the western states 15 years ago and look around on the hillsides, there's red streaks all over the place for 5 years. I mean, it was ugly looking. You know? So that's the story on retardant. One of the mainstay aircraft, the one I love the most, is the Huey. I got a love affair with Hueys, or the Bell 205. The civilian model, of course, is the Bell 205. The military version is the Huey. That is a UH-1H D model there, owned by the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, operated by the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. There's a story there. All the federal aircraft that come out of the Department of Defense that go into other uses have to go to a government entity. They can go to a county, they can go to a state, and it's called the Federal Excess Program. A lot of these old trucks that you see around in fire departments, you see some old military-looking thing, that's all the Federal Excess Program. The Department of Defense transfers title of those pieces of equipment to typically the USDA Forest Service. That's the most common transfer. So DOD does not own this hardware anymore. They transfer it, but it is another government entity. That government entity, typically the USDA, then allows operational use, maintenance, the whole package, other than title, to a state or county entity. So the state of Washington had 3 operational Hueys. I'm going to show you we had 3 operational Cobras when I was there, which was a fantastic aircraft. We had about 15 Hueys in storage, and we had about 22 Cobras in storage. We collected it. It was way cool. We had hangars full of old vintage military hardware because we could get it for nothing, and it was our parts supply, it was our rebuild supply, and the story behind that is Bell Helicopter hates it. They despise it. Not hard to see why. They don't sell parts. We had a parts supply we had a 100-year parts supply, and Bell hates it because they want to sell aircraft. I understand their condition, but the government paid for it, the government still owned it, and the government just transferred it to another government entity that was using it. So, that said, my last working years were spent managing the DNR's fire aviation program. 3 Hueys, 3 Cobras. There is a Cobra. It was awesome. I had this picture and I could not find it because I was going to embarrass that gray-haired woman right there. She had a little less gray hair at the time. She was sitting up in the pilot seat. That's the rear seat. And you're sitting up there high. And it is the coolest aircraft. I got to fly one. I flew one probably a couple hundred nautical miles from the front seat, the gunner's seat. The pilot was in the rear seat. Well, Mary came over to the maintenance hangar one day, and she looked at me, and I said, "Go ahead." It is just cool, isn't it? So we had 3 operational Cobras. 40 knots faster than a Huey, carries every bit as much payload. You can send one of those on scene. I mean, you can have them sitting on a ramp with a bucket attached, which we typically would do. Fire call to come in. The first guy out the door got in the Cobra, and he was off to a set of coordinates. And you could have water dropping on a fire in 10 or 15 minutes, way in the heck up in the mountains. I mean, they were amazing. And Bell Helicopter did not like that because they weren't selling any parts. We had 22 of them sitting in our hangar, nose to tail, side by side. Just racked them up like cordwood. We had engines, transmissions, whole propellers, rotor systems, as well as just all the miscellaneous hardware. And Bell finally came. So I want you to take a look. Notice that thing hanging right below the belly in 2 of those pictures. Actually, you can even see it if you look. Can you see that one right there? That lump? That's a belly hook. Bell claimed that aircraft was never made to have a belly hook. It was unsafe in a belly hook mode. It was odd because the framework in the belly of a Cobra has a hole about 2 feet by 2 feet that is just a piece of skin there, and structural members around the belly itself. Directly above that point, right on the bottom of the transmission, is 2 great big heavy castings that are part of the transmission itself, which is directly on CG in a helicopter. The transmission rotor shaft is the CG. Directly below that transmission rotor shaft, these 2 great big heavy castings with holes in them. I wonder why. Why would you put something that you could hang something on right directly in that position and then not have anything but a piece of aluminum skin below it? Well, Bell claimed there was no paperwork to prove that thing was safe with a belly hook. Interesting enough, that paperwork had been destroyed. Nobody could find it. And it was known that it existed. We finally, after this whole mess happened, an old engineer came up and said, I know about that paperwork. I worked on that. That thing was, and we actually found a Vietnam era photo of them belly hooking stuff to a Cobra. But Bell Helicopter got to the Forest Service, who had title to the aircraft. Forest Service called me up one day and said, we need to meet. So my boss and I went down and met him. And they said, You're done. What do you mean we're done? You're done. You can fly it all you want as an observation aircraft. You may not hook anything on a belly hook. So 3 beautiful multi-million-dollar aircraft turned into beer cans.
Oh, wow.
Can you believe it? And those 22 that were sitting in the hangar all got chopped. We sent them to Tacoma and to a metal shredder. Just made me sick. This guy had a fun story, though. He's one of our mechanics. He's a DNR mechanic. He's long retired, but he was a kind of a military historian. And he spotted that thing on one of our Hueys that was racked up in the hangar. You see what it says? I can't read the top particularly well, but the bottom says First Blood. Here's the story. He saw that and he said, what the heck is that about? And he got researching it. It was the Virginia Rose II. Wow. It was the very first helicopter to arrive in Vietnam. And we had it. And it was going to the chop shop, along with all the other ones. We salvaged it. We were able to get it to a museum. I think it went to San Diego. I've forgotten exactly, but we managed to salvage it thanks to Tom. And there it is in all its glory, sitting on our rack out back, or our ramp. So the Virginia Rose still is alive. Washington DNR runs a helitack crew. That's a 10-year-old crew. A crew is made up of 4 people on a helicopter, 4 to 5, typically a crew chief, a crew of 4, and a pilot. When the bell goes off, they are ready to go. They're airborne within 10 minutes. You send out 5 ground-based firefighters delivered aerially. They connect up the belly hook to a long line. I'm going to go backwards one. I'm going to have to go back a couple. You can see the helicopter in the upper right. That's a long line, 150-foot long line. That's the best helicopter operations are long line because you can drop that bucket down in amongst trees. You just got way more control over it, and it takes a very special pilot to fly long line. Not all helicopter pilots are long line pilots. I have tremendous respect for those guys. So the crew goes out, rigs the bucket and the long line. The pilot goes to work packing water, and the crew starts the initial attack. It's a very effective method. The mechanics who keep them flying, those guys, I love those guys. Mary knows that. Most all of them are retired now. A lot of them were Vietnam era guys. They just had love affairs with Hueys and Cobras, and they could put a Huey together in their sleep. They just know that thing so well. So they would turn the one on the upper left into the one on the lower right. And they did it like this. They'd strip it right out. I mean, they gutted it. There was no wire, there was no hydraulics, there was nothing in it. We'd send the airframe to a local paint shop, and they start putting it back together. Put a Cobra transmission, Cobra engine, which is 500 horsepower greater than a stock Huey engine, and still put the Huey rotor system on it, and they are a workhorse. They are just, you can see it's just gutted out. They'd be doing 2 or 3 at a time. Presently, when we got rid of the Cobras, it was about the time I was retiring, and they were down to 4 Hueys. And my recommendation was the DNR needed 8 Hueys. And it took them quite a few years, but they actually have a fleet of 8. So that keeps as many as 6 operational, 2 in a constant rotation of maintenance. And they follow the military maintenance procedures right to the letter. They're not maintained as a civil aircraft. They're maintained as a military aircraft. So 25, 50, 7,500, 125-hour inspections, and then into the shop in a total teardown. It's like, it's way greater than an annual at 125 hours. Very, very intense maintenance. Anyway, I could go on about Hueys because I got a love affair with them. All right, we're going to switch and look at my job as an air attack. The 337 is a real common air attack platform. It's a nice one. It's comfortable. Got twin engines. You lose a screw, you're still flying. Because a lot of times you're loitering well below ridge lines. I mean, I have a lot of time loitering at relatively low altitude We couldn't go below 500 AGL, but if there was no other aircraft on scene, we could go down to 500 AGL. You know, when you got peaks that are 4,000 or 5,000 feet above you, it's kind of nice to have the second engine, but I flew a lot of 182s. Much nicer aircraft is the Aero Commander, big, heavy, stable. Until you're flying, anybody know where the Columbia River Gorge is? Goes out to Portland. Brian knows. And all the wind coming out of the hot desert conditions of eastern Washington, eastern Oregon, funnels down through the Columbia Gorge because it's a just barely above sea level passage through the Cascades. And you talk about afternoon turbulence, they ought to just knock your teeth out of your head. Such that I was flying one day on a fire, we were trying to get smoke jumpers into that, delivered to a spot. And I had to stay on scene. The pilot says, "Can we get out of here?" I've never had a pilot ask me that. I said, "Can you stay?" Yeah. We stayed on scene another 5 minutes, and my head smashed the top of that ceiling so hard. We had a 5-point arm. And he's doing the same thing. At least I didn't smash my head again, but we were, oh my goodness, it gets turbulent. We got the jumpers in there. They got their mark, and he said, "Now?" I said, "Now." We got out of there. So they're very strong. I can tell you that. We've proven it. Nice ride. Not such a great view is the low wings. I mean, I worked in low wing aircraft sometimes. I mean, you spend a lot of time looking around the wing. High wings are just way better for obvious reasons. And AirTac sits in the right seat. So, and you're always doing right-hand patterns. Everybody else is doing traditional left-hand pattern. AirTac is the top of the pile. I'm going to show a video explaining it. And AirTac is doing right-hand. So you're always watching. Obviously they're going this way, and you're going that way, and you're watching them with about 1,500 feet of vertical separation. So I've had DC-10s underneath me at 1,500 feet. Man, they are big at that close. I worked with some great pilots. This guy was just a particular favorite. He was from South Africa. He had a kind of a cool accent, great attitude. I loved the pilots I worked with. I never had a ringer amongst the pilots. I had a few ringers amongst some of the other folks I worked with, but not him. So take a look at the view we got out that window. See that? Looks a lot like that. Or that. Or that. I mean, it's just a lot of times you're just flying in smoke, smoke, smoke. I had at least 3 potential AirTac trainees that came in and worked under me. One guy stayed right to the point that I had signed him off, and he was ready to go take his final check ride, essentially, with an examiner. They used similar processes to what I was like, the CFI, and then there's a designated examiner. He was signed off to take the check ride, and he said, "I don't want to do it," and he quit. But I had many other people that would take a ride or two there. This ain't for me. They don't like breathing smoke. They don't like bouncing around. They just don't like it. And I'm weird. Right. Okay, a quick look at a fire. This one is Rosebud. That's one day after the fire. That thing looked like when I drove up to it, I was on day 2. It was day 1 I was driving up to it. I got called. It's southwest of Miles City, Montana. Very rugged country. You're only about 30 miles north of Custer Battlefield there. And it's all burned. You can see it's kind of charcoaly looking. The valleys aren't, but there's a green valley up there. But that's pretty typical of a big fire. It just got the right wind conditions, and it became 165,000 acres in about 6 hours. This is a view of a common incident command post, not a big one. So that's just a field. I think it was adjacent to a high school, as I recall. It's very common to be in fields near high schools. And those things are all pre-identified all over the country. It's kind of empty in that picture because everybody's out working. It's the middle of the day, and I was flying over. I just snapped a shot. But that's typical of what they look like. Tent city with trailers, shower trailers, food trailers, refrigerator trailers for ice, just anything you can think of comes rolling on in. And that upper picture is kind of a ground-based view of it. That's called boxing. of the head, or in this case, it was boxing the target. The pilot, that's 3 drops. The pilot came in, did 1. He may have actually turned off the doors at one point. A lot of them have highly adjustable drop doors. He may have done that with 1. I wasn't there for that particular aircraft. I got there the next day. But he clearly boxed that structure in. The fire ran right up, right around it, and saved the structure. My world was radios. There was 4 active radios, 2 Victors, which we call them Victors. They're just our standard aircraft radios, VHFs, and 2 FM radios with multiple frequency potential. You could have 130 frequencies up on either radio. I was typically working with 8 frequencies dialed in at once. And they're all coming in your headset. You don't have 8 headsets. You got 2 ears in one headset, and people talking at you. I mean, talk about drive you nuts. And you actually control it by volume. The radios are pegged at different volume levels. So your most critical radio combo, which is Victor air to air, you got to talk to the other airplanes. You keep that volume the highest, so they'll talk over somebody. The next one is air to ground, and you keep that a little bit lower. And the pilot hears all the same things. A lot of times the pilot will go, you got one on Division Delta air to ground. So he'll tell you, Division Delta just called you and give you a poke in the shoulder. Because I'm missing it. I'm talking to, Tanker 21, and Division Delta's calling me. And then you got dispatchers, and they think they're the center of the world because they're dispatching. And they're good people. I like dispatchers. I'm not being critical of them, but they just keep demanding that you respond to them. And if you don't respond, they keep demanding, and they keep demanding. And then finally you're going, stand by for air attack. Stand by for air attack. And then you got a list of standby for air attacks, and you can't figure out which ones you did unless you write them down. So you've got this thing going on with your knee board. Just typical view. That's southern Idaho. The same place all those other smoke pictures were the day after the smoke cleared. It's gorgeous. So you work with a knee board, and I actually developed my own specialized, that pad was my thing. I spent a lot of time developing it, so I would write in certain places certain things, and I always knew where to look. I'm just that way. I worked with guys who would sit there with a spiral notebook on their knee, and they'd have stuff written all over the place. I knew exactly where it was. Not me. I'm just not made that way. The West is often a mess. I mean, fire danger extreme was not particularly uncommon. And seeing things like this is also not particularly uncommon. Firefighters get a lot of respect in the Western states. I don't know if that transpired on your backyard fire, did it?
Oh, yeah. They told people to quit donating.
That's cool. I mean, it's a fun job, but it's raw bone tired. Is about 3 days and you're raw bone tired, and you're going. It's a 14-day assignment, and then you get 2 days off, and then you can go back for 14, and when you see those things, you come in at the end of the day, and you see that, you're like, I can do this, Just a quick look at a fire. This one was, that's Mount Adams, right on the Oregon-Washington border. That fire was burned right up to the base of the volcano. And while I was on that fire, I got a call, and Air Attack gets the fun job of prowling around. So I did a lot of prowling around. I was in the aero commander. And they said, hey, we think we got smokes up in the Tatoosh Range, which is right directly south of Mount Rainier. So we wheeled on up there, 10, 15 minutes. And that smoke on that ridge is, in fact, fire and lightning had hit that ridge top. So we called that one in. A little bit of a look at, that's actually a Sikorsky sky crane. You can't really see the sky crane. If you look right above the orange mud, red mud, there's an orange thing. That's a sky crane dropping about 2,000 gallons of retardant. They are amazing. 2,000 gallons. The Huey runs around 250 gallons. But a Huey's quick and nimble, and a sky crane is not quite so fast. That's the typical dip site. That one was called Crystal Dip. It was a really pretty one, and then the Sikorsky's actually working on it with a bucket. Yeah. And I had a few Sikorsky pictures that particular day, and they create a lot of wind. And it was really dusting off the runway. It's an amazing amount of dirt flies around with those. They are just some lovely days up there. Crystal Dip, isn't that a pretty sight? I mean, that's little pothole is sitting up on the side of Mount Adams. That's on the north side. Okay, I got the call. I'm going to make it. I only have a few slides to go. So Crystal Dip that's a typical dip site. One of AirTAC's jobs is to find dip sites, because helicopters don't get up with the altitude and don't get around as fast to find that stuff. So, you're constantly on the lookout for dip sites. In 3 minutes can save a fire. I lost probably 2,000 acres on a fire outside of Wenatchee because I saw it. I was at the opposite side of the fire. I was probably 10 minutes flight time to get across the fire. I called the division supervisor and I said, "Are you getting a flame front on your west flank?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "I just saw it go up." I said, "Okay." He had barely seen it. I had a better view. We had a helicopter on scene, but he was down on the Columbia River. He had to climb 2,000 feet in elevation and probably make a 3-mile run. And he was that far behind. Just you could hear that rotor just bucking. Whoa, 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 whoa. Typical Huey. Pulling up, and as he made the drop, it pulled ahead of where he dropped literally by feet. He got most of the water strung out. He made what's called a line drop. He literally controlled his release, and a couple feet of that fire got ahead of that drop, and 2,000 acres went up. You go, nuts. If he'd have been a quarter mile closer, he'd have nailed it. He's an excellent pilot. He's just a guy, he did not miss. He just couldn't get there in time. And that is not atypical. So I'm going to conclude on that. And I got a lot of cool smoke pictures. Huh? Any questions? Yeah, Jared.
How do they go about recruiting? How do they go about recruiting
For air or for fire in general?
in general? I mean, this is not
There's a
easy.
lot of young people still these days that like adventure, and fire sells adventure real easily. So you get in the western states, and it's fairly well known that you can get into wildfire as a summer job. I mean, high school kids, somebody knows somebody that knows somebody, says, "Hey, here's how you get in." So the state hires, the Forest Service hires, the Bureau of Indian Affairs hires, Bureau of Land Management hires. So there's tens of thousands of summer seasonals that get hired and get their feet wet. Of that 10,000 or whatever the number is, there's a couple of them that say, "I like this." And they come back for 2 or 3 years, and they go from a firefighter 2 to a firefighter 1, and they might be a dozer boss or one of those. They're kind of working along in their experience level, and they have a task book. Our kids used to laugh at Dad and say, "Dad's got his merit badge books." And they really are like merit badge books. I mean, there'll be 20 or 30 or 40 items depending on the particular rating you're trying to get. And you have to go for physical school training, and then you have to demonstrate proficiency, and then one more time you demonstrate proficiency, your final on-the-job proficiency. So there's 3 sign-offs on each topic area in a task book that might have 40 topics.
Are the smoke jumpers a different group?
Well, smoke jumpers do the same thing. Nobody starts as a smoke jumper out of high school. You start as a firefighter 2. But they may want to be a smoke jumper, and they spend a couple summers working on the ground and say, "Man, I want to be a jumper." Well, then when they get to a certain level of rating, typically it would be a resource boss, like a dozer boss or a volume boss. In several years of experience, they can apply to be a jumper. And they get taken on, they're called rookies. When they get hired as a jumper, you are a rookie. You're not really a jumper yet. They'll put you on the crew and they'll train you. So jumpers, typically a qualified jumper would be 4 or 5 years of seasonal firefighting. Then they can move into positions there are some near full-time positions. A lot of them and these are all federal government positions. The state does not, most states do not have full-time fire suppression folks, only the federal government does.
I had a roommate in college that claimed he was a smoke jumper.
Once again,
I had a roommate in college that claimed he was a smoke jumper, but now I realize he's just as full of it as I thought he was.
well, you got enough years that the rules were different then. Things were a lot different 30 years ago.
Well, the world was flat back then.
That's true.
Yeah.
Cooled off yet.
I mean, there wasn't task books. There wasn't
Still
on-the-job
molten.
training. Well, there was on-the-job training. You showed up and you did the job, and if you were good, they say, well, do the next job. And that's all
This
gone by
man
the
was so
wayside. Everything's
slow.
the task
By the
book,
time he realized he had to go to the
branch
bathroom,
book
his
approach.
pants were dry.
But everybody starts as a
He couldn't get a
firefighter
smoke
too.
jumper.
That is the basics, and then you move up from there. And so he could well have been a smoke jumper if he was a peer.
I think he was blowing smoke.
Well, he could have been doing that too. Jumpers are fun to work with.
Well, the equipment changed a lot. I had a school teacher who was a jumper out of Missoula,
Uh-huh.
and after World War II, they were jumping with World War II era chutes,
Right.
Oh, Jesus.
and those were dangerous chutes.
Yeah. This is an interesting thing. If you ever happen to see jumpers in action, if they're a Bureau of Land Management jumper, they have their own program. They're still smoke jumpers, but they do not play with U.S. Forest Service smoke jumpers. Forest Service smoke jumpers have round chutes. BLM jumpers have rectangulars. Forest Service believes round is better. The Bureau of Land Management believes rectangular is better. Beats me. So I forgot to put up a slide. Some terminology. A smoke jumper is known as a lawn dart. A repeller is known as a dope on a rope. And a helitack person, I showed you, aerial firefighter delivered by helicopter that lands, and they get out. They're helidonnas, like prima donnas. And the story with the air boss, I missed it back on the ICS thing, but the guy that was above me on the rank is called the Air Operations Branch Director. That individual, I've worked for both men and women. I never worked for a single one that was anything but a highly stressed out person. They're just grumpy. They're always worried about, fretting about everything. They can't get enough of this and they can't get enough of that. They would be the closest to an air boss that I ever heard of. And I used to look at them and think, well, what about us dudes that are up there flying around in the smoke? They're tanker pilots that are going in low, and the air attack is up there trying to keep metal from running in itself. And you're stressed out? And all you got to do is order equipment? But that's those folks. And in my actual day job when I was flying, I did, even though on the org chart, the Air Operations Branch Director was my boss, I talked to the operations chief. The operations chief is the individual that's responsible for the operations on the whole fire. The buck stops for putting the fire out, stops with the operations chief. And I would just be on the air and call the operations chief and say, operations, this is air attack, and that individual would come up. I think I missed the one slide I want to show you. Going back here.
Where's the video?
Huh.
The slide
Did I miss a black slide?
a stack of aircraft, and you're going in you're going to the left, and you're going to the right, because you're on the top.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry, Joe.
I thought you were going to show us a photograph or a video.
My headset is now on.
Your
You're
video.
going to show us a video, or a still photo
That's what I'm trying to find.
of the aircraft in the pattern over a fire.
I'm trying to find it. That's what's bugging me here. It should be here. It was here.
Yeah, we
It's
played.
going to show up as
Flew
a
off.
black. I even tested it.
It's up in smoke.
No.
Anybody?
We did play it. It's there somewhere.
Ooh, that's
Ah, there it is. I went by it. Thank you for your patience. I didn't claim to be video savvy, did I? Okay, Tim. Help me make it play.
Uh-oh.
to your feet.
Click. Did you click it right in the middle of it?
That is it. And we did it once.
Yeah. Does it not play? Did you get it to play before? I don't know. Next animation. I don't know. I don't know how this works. How did
This
you
is
do it
always
before?
my greatest fear when we get to these things. And we even tried it.
Yeah, we did.
And look, it was right down there.
We need one more for George. One more.
Can you hear it?
So Julian or Tech, we're gonna go ahead and bring the seat in.
I don't know why
After he
it
drops,
works.
you see the red stuff flying, you can clear back in.
I didn't know what I did.
Tiger 883, you're cleared for the drop. One ready, go to work. Just on the downwind right now. Gate is armed for the live run. Line is clear.
Air attack, operations, air ground.
Operations, Air Tech.
Hey Steve, can you give me kind of an update and estimated time?
It's about 60 acres now, Brad, and it's still really active on the head, making a nice run. The right flank's fairly active as well. Just started putting some retardant on the right flank. The engines are making good time. I got the helicopter working as well. You know, and it's pretty likely that it's going to bump that rest area up there and also make it all the way to Blacks Creek Road would be big picture. There are some
I'm giving him overall situational awareness of what's going on his fire because I have a good view. And
highway.
I'm not dictating tactics to him at all, and I don't like to do that as an air attack unless they ask for help if they're at a loss. But that's not my job to run the fire. It's the IC's job. My job is to put red stuff and wet stuff on the ground and give them situational awareness.
Lead 47 Dead Horse Air Attack, RS 3006 on the altimeter. We're at 6,500. You're cleared in at 5,500. I'm bringing the seats in at 5,000 and 899's inbound now.
Well, if you could imagine a carousel or multiple carousels stacked on top of each other, that's a lot what it looks like from the air attack's perspective in chunks. As an air attack, I'm at the top of the stack, and reason being, we have a better view from the top, and we can coordinate all the aerial resources coming in and going out. But mostly it's just for the view, is why we're up at the top. And also to give room to the incoming air tankers, which are the next down in the stack. So they come in at about 1,500 feet, usually above ground level, depending on terrain. And then when they go into tactical, they're down at about 1,000 feet before the drop. Air attack always goes clockwise. It's easier to keep an eye on everybody if you're going the opposite direction, but everybody in the same altitudes have to go the same direction for obvious reasons. So it'd be like going around a roundabout, having two-way traffic on it. It just wouldn't work. So we'll racetrack them so they're all following each other. And that way it makes it easier and more effective for us because we can bring them in, do one target description, all the tankers hear it, and we can just have them all tag and extend and put in an extremely long line fast and efficiently. 500-foot AGL level consists of rotor wing, and also that's where we're going to drop, the air tankers and the lead when we're on final. We'll drop from that 500-foot level down into about 100 feet off the ground a lot of times to drop the tankers, and then that's where coordination with the helicopters is really crucial to keep them out. But normally when we're doing our patterns, the helicopters are free to roam 500 feet AGL until we're getting ready to drop in a certain area, then we'll clear them out. A lot of coordination there below 500-foot level. And the air tech's job is to coordinate the whole stack. So it's pretty busy. Also within that 500-foot realm lies the terrain, and it also lies the hazards. A lot of time the towers, the power lines, ham operating radio antennas sticking up off of houses. I've come pretty close to those in smoky environments before, doing low-level lead plane stuff, and we had to go look at where we're going to drop right next to a house when we're doing structure protection, and there's a big giant antenna sticking up 40 feet off the roof. Mostly it's power lines. A lot of the power lines we can't see, especially in timber. There's timber around, they're just completely camouflaged to us. Or wires across ravines is another huge one. Those are almost invisible a lot of times if you're in big canyons. They're putting in more and more windmills now, and the windmills are scary enough, but they have small weather stations before they put in the big windmills. They'll have them scattered all over the place. They're around 100, 150 feet, a lot of them, and they're pretty much invisible. It's just a small pole with a little propeller up on top, enough to ruin your day. Really, the air tech has to rely on the ground personnel a lot to pick up a lot of those hazards down in that 500-foot ring. So it's very helpful for the ground folks to give us a heads up on anything they see. We appreciate it. Air attack pilots are contract pilots, and their main job is to fly the airplane and listen to air traffic control, and they're in the pilot role. My main role as an air attack is division supervisor. I'm a flying division supervisor. And lead plane pilots are all federal agency pilots. The role of the lead is to lead the air tankers. They have a capability of low level, so they can go show the air tankers exactly where they want them to drop. A lot of times when the ground folks see the lead come over, everybody will scamper off, but it's actually a show me run, meaning that we're just showing the air tanker while he's up at 1,500 feet AGL still with a good view where we want to do the drop.
I want to start it right here at the red and take it straight on out. I'm about 150 and 3,300 feet takes you all the way out.
At the same time, the air attack is clearing the line. It should at least prompt you to get on air to ground. Check your radio, maybe you took it off scan or something, and start paying attention because there's going to be some mud in the air pretty quick. I can describe ASM and it'll sum it up. It's aerial supervision module. You've got a lead plane with an air attack in it. So we're capable of doing both lead and air attack at the same time. So we're doing a dual role. Whenever you hear Bravo, whichever number it is, that means that they actually have a right seater and they're capable of doing air attack and they're in the ASM role.
You're not 50 yet, so if you go low into that bulge there, you have left base to the downwind.
Generally in an air attack aircraft, we have two Victors, Victor being a VHF AM radio, commonly known as air-to-air. And on busier fires, we'll have an air-to-air rotor wing, so a separate frequency for the helicopters. And that's just air-to-air, that has nothing to do with air-to-ground. As an importance too, for an air attack, what I'm listening to is fixed wing, rotor wing, and meaning we don't want to bend any metal. That's our number one job as an air attack. You don't want to bend any metal, meaning have an aircraft collide. So then the next step would be air to ground, which is huge, coordinating with the ground and looking out for their safety and letting them know if they have any issues coming up.
Starting to roar out of there pretty good. You guys might want to think about getting out of there.
So generally there'll be two FMs, air to ground and then dispatched. And if they're hitting us with a lot of stuff while we're doing the transition, getting relief air attack, that's when you'll hear a lot of standby for air attack, standby for air attack. Not trying to be rude or short. We just have a lot of radio traffic going on. Someday just set up 6 radios when it's really busy and sit there and try and pick up what's going on each radio. And you'll see how busy it is, and that's normal. That's normal busy for us. And your ear gets tuned to it after a while. But we're not trying to put you off, is what I'm saying, when we don't answer the radio right away. And I remember, and I'll call you back. It might even be 5 minutes, but I'll make a note on my kneeboard to call back Division Alpha or whoever it is. when there's a tanker coming in. That's a busy time for them because that's when they're picking up all the other air tankers that are on scene in their airspace, in their level of the stack. They're looking for everybody there. So they're picking them up and they're all talking to each other. So that's on a fixed wing, Victor.
I'm on Jim 6,000. Okay, I'm 5'2" and just coming across his tail.
Traffic.
And I got you. I'm well above you. Okay.
We're directly communicating with Helibase as AirTAC or ASM, and we're trying to coordinate with them fuel for the helicopters, meaning how long they have on scene. That way we don't have all the helicopters go back for fuel at one time in the heat of the battle, and we have no buckets or heli-tankers or anything. So there's a lot of coordination with Helibase and making sure everything runs smooth, and it's just one more level of the radio traffic that's going on. We've been seeing more and more VLAT operations, very large air tankers. And in my personal opinion, I've dropped them quite a few times now, and they're very effective in the right terrain, the right area. And with those, you have to clear out the airspace as well. You have to have quite a buffer. So what we'll usually do is drop whatever we have on scene, bring the VLAT in, and we'll hold the other aircraft that are inbound at the same time at an IP, drop the VLAT, and then bring in the rest of the aircraft.
A little bit early, that'll be good.
They're quick, efficient, professional pilots, just like the rest of our air tanker fleet.
Passing the road, passing the ravine.
So they're all used to the fire game, especially after the last few years. Everybody's been getting plenty of practice.
Passing the right of way. Sweet, tied in.
But just be heads up with a VLAT, you might be seeing them.
We did.
So when they lay that orange stuff, like how many feet or how long is that? Like,
Well, with that very large air tanker, could have been as much as a half a mile.
okay.
I mean, it's phenomenal the amount of mud that comes out of those things. Where you're talking about this guy, the single engine air tanker, might be a couple hundred feet. But these guys will work in tank teams of 4. It's like having a bunch of hornets up there. Zoom, zoom, zoom.
Yeah.
4 of them putting 250 feet or 400 feet. And they can control it. The door on the bottom is highly controllable. So you can ask them for a spread rate of 2 or a spread rate of 6. And they dial that in. And their doors that dispense this, that open and dispense it, will let the stuff out at a certain rate. So the AirTAC often will call for the dispersal rate. If you know you've got real light fuel, like that last picture, you'd call for a long light dispersal rate. And so it's highly, highly variable. Yeah.
One little bit of trivia, if I remember correctly, the first smoke jumpers were black paratroopers from the Triple Nickel during the Second World War. And the Japanese were floating the balloons over with the incendiaries, and that's where it all started.
I know it was right after World War II. It started Johnson Flying Service in Missoula was where it all started, where it actually got in the Forest Service scheme of things. Now, you may be talking about people that are even earlier than that.
Oh yeah, it was like, middle 40s, early 40s.
Yeah.
And they took these guys and sent them to, it was very competitive to get in, sent them to parachute school, sent them to jump school, and then they kind of figured that out on
Away
their
you
own.
go. So a typical jump aircraft is a Sherpa, one of those ugly looking, or shorts, those boxy, square looking. They'll jump out the back end of it. But Missoula has a DC-3 that's been converted to a turbine. It's just the sweetest, most beautiful looking airplane you ever saw. And that's kind of the pride of the fleet, I think, is the Missoula Jumpers DC-3.
Dennis, how hard was it to maintain VFR with all the smoke around it? Was that?
But you got to work at it. Some of those early pictures I showed you with my buddy from South Africa, that was a particularly smoky fire. It was very large and heavy timber. And we did a lot of, okay, can you get me down in there? Yeah, of course there. And I never worked with a pilot yet, not one, that did something stupid. But they'll take a challenge. You know, I need to see that. Let's see what we can do. You know, they worked on in there, but you do a lot of banking and rolling and, you know, and then pulling out to avoid the smoke. We did not fly through smoke. I mean, we did not fly through smoke because smoke has rocks in it. And so everybody understood that, you know, that's the rule. I did fly with a tanker pilot one time. It was on that Mount Adams fire. And it was that crystal dip site, that real pretty one. We were flying, that was right as Mount Adams went up to us to the south. And to get a look at that dip site, we had to come in from a direction we were flying directly at the mountain. And I was looking at it, and I'm looking at it, and he says, "Are you worried?" I said, "No, I trust you, but man, I tell you, it looked like you were going to splat right into the side of Mount Adams." And he rolled it around, and we had to do that multiple times. And I said, "You want to try it?" And I said, "Me?" He says, "Yeah, try it." He says, "You're not going to hurt anything." I'm thinking, well, no, I'm not going to hurt anything because I'm a chicken. And I came in at the prescribed altitude, and he says, "Hold your altitude." And I just easing that yoke. My fingers are pulling on that yoke, and I'm not trying to pull on that yoke, and my fingers are pulling on that yoke. He says, "Hold your altitude. Hold your altitude." He must have told me 5 times to hold my altitude, right? He said, "You're okay, hold your altitude." And I'm finally pushing the yoke forward. And he said, "Okay, you can roll it now." I mean, it's just that ascending, you guys know it, when you got ascending terrain and it's as big as a volcano, is really unnerving. So that's kind of a weird answer to your question, but we never flew into smoke. But there was no limit as to how close you could get to it. I mean, I'm pretty sure we had wingtips touching it at times. You know, you just do what you got to do to see. But
What about night restrictions?
I can't.
What about night restrictions?
Oh, that's a good one.
What about it?
Nobody flies at night. You can fly to the end of civil twilight, and you better have your wheels on the pavement. I mean, that's just the rule. No, end of civil twilight, and you're done. Helicopters, fixed wing, doesn't matter what. It's all over with. Now, when I was leaving, and this is 10-year-old information, they were talking about doing infrared work with drones. Now, I don't know where they've progressed with that. It would make sense to do infrared work with drones. They did have night flights, very high altitude night flights 10 years ago that were infrared night flights, and they would map the entire perimeter with very high precision. And that was a great benefit to the ground-based people, but nobody flies at night. Yes?
Is there a typical area that the stack covers in order for that air attack to have eyes on everything they need to have visuals on? You know,
The size of the...
Yeah, the area that the stack covers.
No, it's highly, highly variable. That circular that he showed is that's the ideal model. Often it was elliptical. It could be a box with a round side. You kind of do what you got to do. When you bring the tankers in, they're the first to come in the stack below you. They come in typically 1,500 feet. You heard that air tax say he gave him an altimeter, he gave him a heading or a position to fly in, and an altitude to come in at. And they would typically fly pretty close to a racetrack. I'm sorry, wrong direction. They would fly pretty close to a racetrack. And below them, if it was a big fire, there would be a lead aircraft that was already down low. And you might have 3 air tankers coming in that upper level racetrack, and they're going to fly pretty circular. And it could be 8 or 10 miles. If it's a big fire and you got a lot of tankers coming in, the circle gets bigger for spacing. You just spread them out, and then when the lead plane is ready, air tac is working with the tankers when they're coming in. Lead comes on that Victor frequency, the air-to-air frequency, and Lee takes over and says, tanker 21, come on in, come on my tail. So tanker 21 will then say, I got eyes on you, and will come in and pick up on, they'll be doing their pirouette. It's a big dance. It's actually very fun to try and keep track of it, but you're always, they're moving this way and you're moving that way. It's actually confusing to follow it, but that tanker will go in, do typically a show me run with the lead, and then make the drop, climb out, and air attack would then come back to control of that tanker and send them out a certain way, and the next ones will come in. So it's a really variable pattern, and air attack is probably the least uniform, in that air attack's got to be looking at the perimeter of the fire. So if it's a triangular shape to the fire, you're flying all kinds of crazy things. But it's not at all uncommon to have 6, 8, 10 miles on a big fire. And the other thing that often happens is, we used to call it, there's a wall or a bridge, call it a wall. And helicopters, your wall is the Columbia River south. Air tanker operations in ongoing, your wall stays south of the Columbia. Now that's too big a river, but you'd have helicopters working one side of the fire, and they might be 6 miles away from the air tankers who are working the other side. And then you'd mix them back up when the air tankers were going back out. Did that answer your question? Yeah. It's not at all that theoretical circle is great. It just gets really wild in practice.
I noticed during the local fires, there were the two major complexes that the VLATs were coming out of Chattanooga and Lake City, Florida. Is it typical out west that they would be that far away? Or?
Yeah, the reason being is the VLATs require a huge ground-based support operation. They pump that mud at tremendously high rates, which means tremendously large equipment and tremendously high volumes of retardant at an airport that can handle a very large air tanker. So you got to have 10,000 foot runways. I mean, they're going out fully loaded, just loaded to the gunnels. And you have to have that ground-based operation they got to be near good road systems that they can get the retardant in there. They got to have high volumes of water to mix the retardant. They actually have they call it a batch plant where they actually mix it. It's a big ground-based operation to support a large air tanker. Or these guys can have something that's more akin to, a handful of F500 or 550 pickups pulling tanks. Much smaller, much more mobile ground-based operation, and if they're going to use retardant. So the bigger the aircraft, absolutely, they got to fly a long ways away. It was not uncommon for us to have air tankers coming out of Boise all over Oregon, Washington, Idaho. I mean, it's just too pricey to set up those huge bases and move them. So they just make the aircraft fly farther, which to me is a diminishment of the capability of that. Those large air tankers are very expensive, and that, as that air attack said, they're very effective, but long flight distances, and it's just a massive amount of hardware.
I saw that there were military C-130s that have some sort of pod.
Yeah, they got a slide-in unit that I don't know exactly how it worked. I never worked with one. The military has had them, and they get a lot of publicity when they deploy one. But
well, they did for the local fire.
Did they use them here?
One out of Rapid City,
oh, okay.
South Dakota. Like you could tell from the flight aware that they were headed back for Rapid City.
Wow.
Yeah, we're the small guys, they run single engine air tankers out of Asheville easily, and they run a lot of them. They had 4 or 5 if they had brought those in. They didn't, for whatever reason, they didn't choose to do that, but they could have easily done that. Other questions?
Great.
I'm going to conclude with one final thought. I don't know if I have the slide that said it, but I really felt privileged to do the job. It was kind of an amazing thing. I never dreamed I would do that kind of thing. And the caliber of people that I worked with was amazing. I mean, those pilots, I got to know tanker pilots and obviously a lot of air attack pilots, but occasionally, in training operations in the spring, or I'd happen to land at a tanker base, we'd go back for fuel and be a tanker base. And the caliber of those people is amazing. I mean, it was just just something to work with them. Truly a privilege. So, thanks for listening. That's funny. Tim, I can't turn it on.